The United States spends nearly $1 trillion a year on defense, almost double what every other NATO ally spends combined. 11 nuclear-powered carriers, roughly 800 overseas bases, an arsenal of 3,700 nuclear warheads. Europe has nothing like it, and that was never an accident. It was the product of a deliberate bargain, one that is now unraveling. NATO's own accounting for 2024 draws a line in the sand. The United States spent roughly $997 billion on defense, while every European NATO member combined spent about $454 billion. That's not just a gap, it's a gulf, with the United States outspending its closest allies by more than 2 to 1. America's defense budget alone accounts for nearly 2/3 of total NATO spending and more than 1/3 of all global military expenditure. European NATO countries, even together, contribute less than half of what Washington does. This imbalance isn't just about raw dollars, it is written into the alliance's politics. For years, NATO set a goal for each member to spend at least 2% of its gross domestic product on defense. In 2014, only 3 allies met that threshold. A decade later, after mounting pressure from Washington and a security crisis on Europe's eastern border, the alliance reports all 32 members are finally on track to hit the 2% mark by 2025. Poland, facing Russia across its border, now spends 4.48% of its gross domestic product on defense, more than double the European average. But just as European budgets start to climb, NATO has already raised the bar. At the 2025 Hague Summit, leaders agreed to a new target, 5% of gross domestic product for defense by 2035. The message is clear: Europe's military investment is rising, but the gap with the United States remains enormous. These numbers set the stage for more than a spending contest. They shape what kind of militaries Europe can build, what kinds of missions they can take on, and how far the continent can go in closing the capability gap with America. 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers form the backbone of America's global reach. Each one is a floating airbase able to launch dozens of strike aircraft and operate for months without resupply. No other country has more than 2 carriers, and none can match the scale or endurance of the US fleet. These ships do not just patrol American waters, they anchor US presence from the Mediterranean to the South China Sea, ready to project power on short notice. Behind the carriers stands a web of nearly 800 overseas military bases. From Ramstein in Germany to Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, these sites give the United States a permanent forward footprint on 4 continents. They support rapid deployments, intelligence gathering, and logistics for expeditionary forces. In a crisis, this basing network allows American troops, aircraft, and ships to move faster and farther than any rival. At the core of this system is the US nuclear arsenal. As of 2026, the United States maintains roughly 1,770 deployed nuclear warheads, more than any other Western power. The triad of land-based missiles, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and strategic bombers ensures that deterrence is never out of reach. Stealth bombers like the B-2 Spirit and the emerging B-21 Raider can deliver nuclear or conventional strikes anywhere on the globe. This combination of carriers, global bases, and nuclear firepower is not just a show of force. It defines what American defense spending actually buys: the ability to intervene, deter, and shape events far beyond US shores. For decades, this has been the standard by which military power is measured, one that no European country or even the continent as a whole has tried to replicate. After World War II, the architects of Europe's recovery faced a stark dilemma: rebuild armies for independent defense or channel resources into economic growth and social stability. The Marshall Plan delivered billions in American aid, but it came with a strategic bargain. Instead of rearming to pre-war levels, most Western European governments accepted a new kind of security, one anchored by the NATO alliance and the American nuclear umbrella. This arrangement freed up national budgets for welfare programs, public health, and education. The logic was simple: every dollar spent on tanks or fighter jets was a dollar not spent on hospitals or schools. Over decades, this trade-off became a defining feature of European societies. Dr. Johannes Kraus, a senior NATO policy planner, puts it bluntly: Europe made a conscious choice to prioritize social investment over military self-sufficiency. The alliance was designed to let us do that. This was not an oversight or a failure of will. It was a deliberate design, one that shaped both the structure of European militaries and the expectations of their citizens, but the price of this model became clear over time. Fragmented procurement, national armies with different equipment and doctrine, and a chronic dependence on American power. These were not accidents, they were the operational penalties of a system built to defend territory, not to project force. As defense budgets rise again, the question is whether Europe can overcome these structural limits or if the logic of the old bargain still holds. Across Europe, the reality of fragmentation comes into sharp relief not just on paper but in the field. On any given day, less than 70% of Germany's Leopard 2 tanks are ready for action, most sidelined by shortages of spare parts and maintenance backlogs. In 2018, Germany's entire submarine fleet was out of commission, with all 6 boats unavailable for deployment due to repair delays and a lack of compatible components. These are not isolated incidents. During NATO's air campaign over Libya, coalition pilots discovered that refueling one nation's jets with another nation's tankers was often impossible because of mismatched equipment and incompatible standards. Soldiers from different armies train on different radios, fire different calibers, and follow different manuals. Lieutenant Colonel John Miller, a retired director of NATO's logistics operations, sums up the cost. He says, "Readiness erosion will outpace acquisition unless we move to pooled sustainment contracts. The operational price of fragmentation is paid in hours lost, missions delayed, and capabilities left idle." As Europe's defense budgets rise, these failures highlight a deeper problem. No amount of new spending can deliver results if the machinery of war remains divided by borders and bureaucracy. Russian tanks rolled into Crimea in 2014, but it was the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 that shattered Europe's sense of security. Overnight, decades of gradual defense cuts and careful spending looked dangerously out of date. Within days, Germany's Chancellor announced a €100 billion emergency fund, calling it a Zeitenwende, a turning point for German defense policy. Stock prices for European arms makers soared, and venture capital poured into defense technology, jumping from €200 million in 2021 to €2.6 billion by 2025. The mood across European capitals shifted from caution to urgency. One German defense official put it bluntly: "We realize that the world we built our security on no longer exists." NATO communiques called for immediate investment, and national parliaments rushed through budget laws. But as the money flooded in, old questions returned. Could Europe's patchwork militaries keep up with the pace of threat, or were they still bound by the limits of their own design? France and the United Kingdom stand as Europe's only independent nuclear powers, each maintaining arsenals that are modest next to America's but symbolically vital. France's Forster Frappe and Britain's Trident submarines represent the continent's lone sovereign deterrents, yet even these are dwarfed by the scale and reach of the United States nuclear triad. As of 2026, the United States retains around 1,770 deployed nuclear warheads, with roughly 100 American tactical bombs stationed under NATO arrangements in Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Turkey, and the United Kingdom. The launch codes for these weapons remain firmly under American control. In July 2025, the United Kingdom and France signed the Northwood Declaration, pledging deeper cooperation on nuclear doctrine and strategic communication, but stopping short of any joint command. The following month, Germany and France opened formal talks on nuclear policy, but the outcome remains unclear. For all the talk of European autonomy, the continent's ultimate security guarantee still rests on American decisions, a boundary that no amount of spending or integration has crossed. 3 paths now stand before Europe, each shaped by hard numbers and political will. The new NATO roadmap demands 5% of GDP for defence by 2035, a target that would require budgets to double within a decade. Yet the means to get there remain contested. The European Union has floated proposals for €150 billion loans for arms fund, but so far no legal instrument or binding commitment exists, only debates and draft agendas. Poland, already at 4.48% of GDP, points to one future: national surges in spending driven by threat perception and political consensus. Another path runs through pooled procurement and shared logistics, with joint contracts and readiness targets designed to lift the whole. Dr. Agnieszka Nowak, a Polish defence analyst, warns that without real integration, more money just buys more of the same fragmentation. The decisive indicators will be whether new financing mechanisms take hold, whether joint projects outpace national ones, and whether readiness rates finally climb above the plateau. The numbers will tell the story. The choices made now will set the course for Europe's next decade of security. Europe's armies reflect a conscious gamble, invest in welfare, trust in alliances, and accept military limits. But as €150 billion in new defence loans collide with old divisions, the real test isn't money, it's unity. In an era of renewed threats, that bargain now faces its sharpest reckoning yet.